Good afternoon, everyone. Now, I'm going to keep this one shorter. My last few have been pretty long, and I don't intend for them to be that long. Sometimes I look at it, I'm like, oh man, this is way too long. I, go off on tangents and rants. And anyway, I'm going to try to stay on point, keep this one shorter. A few things. I'm going to start out with I guess you could say the important or the bad news, or however people want to look at it. Then I'm going to go to the good news, I think. Because, I think that's how I'm going to do this. The bad news or the important news or the stuff that people need to know about or might want to know about. The protests and so forth have spread to other cities. I'm sure people are aware of that. It was pretty much predicted that was going to happen. I would say it's even kind of common sense. These things don't happen in a vacuum. Of course, they're going to spread to larger cities, different cities throughout the nation. And by the time it's all said and done, might be in every large city throughout the nation. Who knows? But just be aware of that, especially if you live in what's considered a major metropolitan area or city. If you or family members, or work downtown or in any of the really busy areas of the major metropolitan cities, just be aware that these protests, i.e. / whatever riots, could break out at any time. They are pre-planned, they're organized. There's been reports of things on Craigslist, or I didn't even know that was still around, but whatever, advertising for people to join in, and they're paying them a certain amount of money, throughout the week or whatever, large amounts of money from what I understand. It's all to cause chaos. It's all to burn it all down, to do away with the old and bring in the new. So they did this stuff before. Like I mentioned before, like the last 10 years, or maybe not quite that long, but definitely, the BLM Antifa thing over the selections and, the lockdowns and all the rest of that stuff. So just be aware of that, so you don't want to get caught up in these things inadvertently. I'm on the road a lot, and sometimes there are roads that are closed and detours, and you just always got to be aware of your surroundings. You always got to have a backup plan, a way out, a way of escape. Know the different roads and where they lead around your area and so forth, so you don't get caught up in a lot of traffic or caught up in some type of situation you don't want to be caught in. So that's the first thing. The second thing, people are probably aware, I mentioned it before, it's all over the internet now, the No Kings protest, where actually Dr. William Schneblin had, I shared his video actually to the post, Dr. William Schneblin, if people want to check it out, his YouTube video, his channel. It's SCHNOEBLIN, Schneblin, William Schneblin. But anyway, he put out a very good video on this and some information. Speaking of which, I just said, you got to be aware of your roads and detours and everything. Yep. See, I'm stuck behind a lot of traffic now because there's something going on up ahead of me. So you just never know. So you just always got to be paying attention and being aware of your surroundings. But anyway, he mentioned how today is a very significant day, and he mentioned the No Kings protest because in his estimation, No Kings didn't just mean a protest against the president where people are comparing him to a king, a dictator, or whatever else. And I agree. I mean, I've done it myself. I think, people want a king. They selected a king or elected a king or whatever, whether they realize it or not. Dude's acting like a king, acting like a dictator, in my estimation, in my opinion, okay? But anyway, so they're saying, hey, America doesn't have a king, we don't want kings. But what Dr. Schneblin said is, actually, this is deeper. It's more spiritual in the way that they don't want Jesus the king. It's actually a protest against Jesus. That's what he was saying, that it's much more spiritual than people realize. And then he mentioned today being June 11th, that today is one of those witching days, with the strawberry moon, full moon, what have you. You know, it's one of those days where it's not necessarily a solstice, but it's one of those days where, you know, the Lucis Trust and so forth, they're involved in all of this, and they want to open portals, whether people believe in it, don't believe in it. The bottom line is these people do, okay? And they cast their spells and their incantations, and it's a witching day. So he was suggesting, he put something on, you know, the description page of his video. Like I said, I shared it to the post yesterday, a specific prayer that people could pray if they feel led to fast or what have you for this specific day, that all of the evil that may be planned may not come to fruition against certain people or places or whatever it is, because it's one of these things where you don't fight against flesh and blood, but against the principalities and so forth. And the weapons of our warfare are not carnal. However, saying that, you know, they are making them carnal in these protests and riots, because that's why the National Guard has to be out there, as well as the police and the Marines, and who knows how many more National Guard or possibly Marines will be deployed to the areas and so forth. So just keep these things in mind. Just be aware of these things, you know, because that's today, and today is technically 6/11, but in the occult world, a 6 is a 9, so you do the math, okay? Just saying, you know, just be aware, okay, of these things. Another thing is, usually don't listen to them directly. I'll listen to the Mike from Around the World segments and so forth. But the whole thing with, hold on, I got to turn around here. The whole thing with Paul Begley on his Patreon channel, it was sent to me yesterday that supposedly there's some information about how in Atlanta the employees of a particular hospital, I don't know the name of the hospital, even if I did I probably wouldn't say it, but the employees of a particular hospital are they have received a memorandum that they're going to be getting some gear in, for lack of a better term, that has to do with, we'll call it NBCR. People don't know what that means, you can look it up. NBCR, N as in Nancy, B as in boy, CR. Okay, type of equipment and gear to protect them. Now, I find that intriguing and interesting if this is true, because that kind of lines up with what Stephen Benoon and Deborah Tavares talked about with the July 4th possible biological situation, and other people have talked about it as well. There's been reports released on it. Nations Conspire channel did a very good video on this, where the people, you know, the politicians and so forth, responsible for signing this document and making everyone aware of it, you know, are interviewed. And whatever people think about all of this, okay, the bottom line is, man, say for instance it goes down on July 4th or even before that time, it'll probably be the major cities, the major metropolitan areas that are affected the most, and where they have the most people to do the most damage. So Atlanta would make a lot of sense, you know, but I haven't heard of any other memorandums or anything for other people, or, you know, or other hospitals, receiving any of this information. But like I said, it was on Patreon. The person that sent it to me, you know, gave me the details as much as they could, because I couldn't see the Patreon video because I don't subscribe to any of that stuff, so I don't pay for it, so I didn't see any of it, okay? And like I said, I don't know how legit it is or not. All right, I'm just saying that it makes sense because it lines up with what other people are talking about and presenting as far as information goes for July 4th. So just be aware of all these things today because of the witching garbage, okay? The protests that continue and spread. This Saturday, the No Kings protest. If you go to their site, you can actually type in your zip code, like I mentioned before, and you can see how many of these things are around your area and where they're located. That way, if you're out and about, running errands, doing whatever you got to do, you don't get caught up in the mess because you're aware of where these things are being planned at. So you don't, like I said, you don't get caught up in it. So be aware of that. And then, of course, provided everything's cool and get through the weekend and there's no major issues or problems or whatever else, just be aware of, what they may have planned for July 4th. So that's all the bad news, okay? That's all the stuff that I can think of that people might want to be aware of and made aware of. Now the good news, okay? After the video I put out yesterday, it's just amazing to me, how it's like, wow, stuff just kind of hits you right in the face. You're not expecting it to. And it's just like, wow, man, this is a really cool confirmation here. I'm listening to the radio. I'm on the road. I'm listening to the radio. I'm flipping channels, and I come across this person that's preaching. I'm like, okay, well, let me listen and see what they have to say. I have no idea who the person is. And they're actually teaching on the Good Samaritan. I'm like, wow, I haven't heard a preacher or teacher or whatever talk about the Good Samaritan in a long time. Maybe not even since like Sunday school. I don't know if I've ever heard anybody preach or teach on the Good Samaritan outside of Sunday school, So I'm listening to what he has to say, and I have no idea who the person is. I'm just kind of guessing, like, who is this guy? Who is this guy? Well, it turns out his name's Adrian Rogers. Some people may be familiar with him, may not. I don't know. But anyway, because he mentions, during the teaching, that he comes across a man that really needs some help. Kind of like the Good Samaritan story, right? And the person even recognizes him and says, "Are you Adrian Rogers?" And he goes, "Yes, I am." And he goes, "Oh, I really need to talk to somebody." He goes, I'm really going through a hard time. I'm really going through some difficulty now. And so he just happened to be at the right place at the right time. Kind of like the Good Samaritan, people familiar with the story, And the thing that was interesting to me about that is we have the situation where I talked about where, a person talked about, illegal demons, illegals being demons. And so first I hear this about the Good Samaritan, and I'm thinking to myself, well, yeah. I mean, so if people are getting beat down, beat up, whatever, left for dead, but they're an illegal, are people not going to stop and help them? Or are people going to be holier than thou, religious, pious, whatever else, like the priest and that passed the Good Samaritan and basically was like, oh man, it sucks to be you, you shouldn't have gone this way, and they beat you and left you for dead, and now you're going to die because you made a bad choice. Oh well, I got things to do, places to go, people to see, And then it's the Samaritan that's basically the outcast that stops and helps the traveler that gets beaten to a pulp, right? Where these so-called Christians or believers or, the religious people are the ones that turn a blind eye, actually mock him or ignore him. They don't have the time for the man who's laying there bleeding and dying, where the Samaritan, who would really be the one that you would think would be the one that would ignore the man the most, is the one that stops and renders aid, right? Well, and as Jesus is talking in the parable to the rich lawyer, basically is what the guy is, who's saying, hey, I keep the law, and what must I do to be saved? And and Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. And he goes, well, who's my neighbor? And then that's when Jesus tells him, hey, this is your neighbor. Kind of sound familiar? So people demonizing, what is referred to as illegals, that basically are just here living, And I understand, like I said before, maybe they shouldn't be here at all, but the point is they are here, okay? But does it kind of sound familiar to a certain extent, right? And then on top of that, I come across this video, I shared it earlier, and I implored people to listen to what the young man said. This young man is what would be considered an illegal. He came to the country, his parents were illegal, he comes to the United States, and his visa expired when he was like 6 or 7 years old. He gets arrested, detained by ICE on his way to like volleyball practice. This kid's an honor student. He's a Brazilian national, okay? Can't remember his name right now, Marcellus, I think. People can look it up. His story in Boston happened about 5 days ago, and I shared the video to the post. Really listen to what he says. Not his lawyers in the beginning. They all have an agenda. But listen to the man's testimony. The young man. Looks like he's about 16, 17 years old. According to him, he's a believer in Jesus Christ. Oh, but he's also an illegal though, okay? But he's a believer in Jesus Christ. And he spent most of the time while being detained in this prison, this ICE prison, where they didn't have TV or anything like that, according to him, which is interesting to me because even in federal prison they have TV, even cable, okay? Not just regular TV, cable, sports channels, you name it, in the federal penitentiary. At least they did. I know because I used to work there, and I was amazed at how well these guys were treated, okay? Commissary privileges, getting the best of the food, best snacks, TV, you name it, okay? But anyway, this kid can't have any communication with the outside world. So what does he do? He preaches the gospel. This illegal demon, according to him, he loves Jesus and he's preaching the gospel. And he asks for a Bible, but they won't give him a Bible. They won't give him a Bible because he wants to hand out Bibles. He wants to read the Bible. He wants to preach the gospel. He wants to help the fellow detainees, those illegal demons, right? So, again, the good news is, the Lord will confirm things to you, to your family, in your life, or whatever, when you're obedient to Him and you preach the hard messages, the messages nobody else wants to preach, or very few want to preach, or very few want to talk about because they're controversial and they might hurt people's feelings. But like I said, I'm just minding my own business. I'm turning the channel on the radio. I come across this teaching on the Good Samaritan. I'm like, wow, this is pretty timely. This is pretty cool. This is pretty awesome. It reminds me of what's happening now, or what could be happening in the near future, as illegal demons, are, laying in the street, bloody, beaten, and nobody wants to help them because they're illegals. Forget the fact that they're human beings, but they're illegal, so nobody wants to help them. And then this kid gets arrested on his way to volleyball practice or whatever, I think. He's an honor student. He's in high school, minding his own business. But because his visa expired when he was 6 or 7, and he was brought here illegally because his parents were illegals and he was born in this country, they arrest him. But he uses it to God's glory. All right? So again, people cannot afford to be ignorant. They can't afford to be, judgmental over things they don't understand. And, don't buy into the narratives, either the right, the left, the blue, the red, the paradigm. Use your own brain. Use the wisdom and the common sense and the discernment that God gave you, and find out the facts of things before people jump to conclusions and, call people illegal demons or they don't belong here. And then my friend John sent me something of this woman totally unhinged, completely unhinged, full of hate, but supposedly a Christian, okay, but full of hate, just talking about let the illegals burn, let them burn in hell, let them all burn, let them all go down, let them burn in the cities. It's like people need to wake up, and they need to see that this is planned, that these protests, these riots, these things are organized and planned and have been for a long time. And you always need a scapegoat. Somebody always got to blame somebody else. There's always got to be blame passed along. All right? So think about it. You know, be wise, be discerning. Is there evil in the world? Yes, but it's not just from people that don't belong in this country. Like I said yesterday, Americans are just as evil, if not more evil. Okay? So let's not be hypocritical. Like I said yesterday, let's use some wisdom and discernment, and, you know, and be smart about these things. And just recognize that these illegals are human beings as well, and a lot of them might be Christians, and as a matter of fact, they might love Jesus more than a lot of Americans do. You know, it's been my experience that people that don't speak the language that we speak, or, you know, have different skin color or different nationality, they are more believers, or should I say, they live the life more, they set the example more than the Americans do from the Christian churches in our country. A lot of times. Not all the time, but a lot of times. So keep those things in mind, you know, as these protests continue, as the violence continues, as it gets spread like wildfire everywhere, and they want to demonize people that people say don't belong here at all. Fair enough, but understand that some of these people might be even a stronger Christian than the people you know. You know, a better, you know, more of a believer than the people that you know, or the people that you associate with, or whatever. Maybe, maybe not. You don't know until you actually research and investigate and find out the truth of things. So, anyway, that's it. Y'all have a good and blessed day. Take care. Just wanted to let everybody know about these things that's going on, and just be ready. And like I said, man, if you're out in public, if you know, and you come across somebody that might be illegal or whatever, if you can understand them and they can understand you, maybe talk to them. Maybe see where they're coming from. Maybe see what the story is, and don't just say, well, you don't belong here. You shouldn't have ever came here to begin with. Like I said, they might be like this young man, Marcellus, I think his name is, Brazilian national, that is a strong believer in Jesus, and he gets imprisoned and he preaches the gospel as an illegal. Isn't that interesting? All right, y'all take care. Have a good one. Bye-bye.